Pitchbook podcast. Zach is pitching Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, and I am pitching Stalking the Atomic City by Marikan Huish. Batter up! I didn't even tell you what I was pitching until now. Do you have any idea what that means? Stalking the Atomic City.
No, like I say, the last book that you did was Becoming a Supple Leopard. So I don't even know what you've opened up. The great thing about this podcast is you've opened up my mind to books that exist that I didn't even know existed that are nonfiction.
Right, exactly.
So
you want me to just go first since we are already talking about it? Stalking the Atomic City?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Tell me what you know about Chernobyl.
Okay, Chernobyl.
You were probably 4 or 5 years old when it happened.
Let's see.
Don't look anything up. You just, this is off the top of your head.
Okay. Chernobyl was a nuclear power plant that melted down in Europe, like Ukraine.
Correct. Just outside of Kiev.
Okay. Let me just think about it because I haven't thought about this at all since last week. Last week I was really thinking about Chernobyl. I'm trying to remember what it's like. It heated up and they couldn't cool it down.
Right. They were doing a test that they shouldn't have done or something. And the book is not about the disaster.
Once that process starts, it's like, get out of the way.
It's just a meltdown and they couldn't stop it. Yeah.
It's like you just have to get everyone, evacuate, get out. And I don't know how many deaths resulted from Chernobyl. Do you?
I don't know either, but this is actually just about years later.
That's the extent of my knowledge of Chernobyl.
So basically, meltdown happens. They evacuate everybody in Pripyat and the surrounding areas. Pripyat's a city that was kind of like where all the employees lived. Anyway, there's an exclusion zone, so certain radius that people are not allowed to go into. And it's kind of like an underground tourist destination for people to go into and check out like this this like deserted, like last minute desert. Like there's like toothpaste on the toothbrush kind of thing. Like sorry, you left, and it didn't matter. You didn't even grab your valuables. You're just gone. So the author is like a tour guide for this kind of illegal tourism in Pripyat and around Chernobyl. And that's kind of his job. So he writes this book about what it's like to go there and why he goes there, but also a little bit about some of the people that he takes with him as a tour guide. And while I'm talking, you should just at least Google some like pictures.
Okay.
Of Pripyat, because it's crazy. Like, how
I Googled some
abandoned
info about the deaths around Chernobyl, so I've got some data now.
Yeah, tell me that real quick.
All right. So everybody knows what I failed to know. The immediate deaths, I would have guessed a lot more. 31 people died within a few weeks of the explosion due to acute radiation sickness and injuries, including plant workers and first responders, firefighters, and rescue workers. Long-term deaths, it's harder to estimate, but according to a 2006 study, the WHO reported 4,000 deaths may eventually be attributed to radiation exposure from the disaster across Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, especially from thyroid cancer and other related deaths. And the Internal Atomic Energy Agency, I didn't even know that was an agency, and other UN bodies estimated that around 9,000 excess cancer deaths could be expected over time. So let's call it 13,000 people impacted. But then you keep going, it's saying like 93,000. I don't know.
Yeah. Exactly.
Who knows?
We don't know. But the point is, so just Google some pictures real quick of like Pripyat or Chernobyl, and just like because it'll help you get a sense of what this guy's trying to describe. I guess
how do you spell Pripyat?
Pripyat.
Pripyat.
Yeah, like I don't know. Just Google Chernobyl and you'll see some crazy pictures. There's like a famous Ferris wheel that's just abandoned and like broken down and falling apart, and
Oh,
like
wow. Okay,
government
I
houses.
see it. I see it.
See what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
So part of this book is I really feel like you have to have some sort of background, even if it's just looking at some of these images of what happened, how dilapidated and abandoned it is. Does that make
Oh, yeah.
sense?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah,
Otherwise,
it's like
otherwise you read this and I guess to get to my, I guess, critique of the book or whatever, um, you have to kind of have a background. Otherwise, it won't it won't be as impactful, if that makes sense. And for some reason, I've always been interested in the Chernobyl disaster. There's actually a really, really good series on HBO about Chernobyl, and it's really well done. And it's more about like the actual disaster, why they explain it really well, why it happened and how it happened, and they go over the cleanup, and it's really interesting. But you kind of have to have that background, otherwise, this book might be you might be kind of lost on you. So that's just my preface, right? Like, um, because he kind of does things in I guess it'd be first person, but almost second person. Like he says, like you go. I think I want to say it's like second person, where he says you go past the guards, you sneak past them at 5 a.m. and then you sneak under the barbed wire. Does that make sense? Like it's kind of a weird way to write it, if that makes any sense. Like
Mhm.
it's not very, it's almost atmospheric rather than like factual. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And he
Okay.
says like you go and find an empty, or, a full bottle of vodka that had been there since 1986. You
Wow.
drink it to get warm or whatever. Anyways, that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
and maybe
He's kind of
I'm wrong about.
describing what it's like to walk through
Yeah,
an apocalyptic type of
right. But if you
post.
don't kind of have those visual pictures in your mind, it's probably he doesn't do a good job of like describing the paint coming off the wall and all the dolls in the nursery that are just sitting there. Does that make sense? Like he doesn't really describe it to you. You kind of have to know it beforehand.
Well, it's kind
Um,
of like you're reminding me of the Mount Vesuvius in the city of Pompeii, where people
uh-huh.
are just
Yeah,
died in
exactly.
action. They're
Right,
like
right.
running and they're
Yeah, except for this
torched.
one, they just got bussed out and they left all their belongings there.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, the point is, I really liked the book, but I do have a weird thing about. I just think it's kind of interesting, the whole Chernobyl disaster. So you kind of have to have that, otherwise this book will be a little bit not great. And I don't know if I loved the. I guess I kind of wish there was more facts or more details when it's more like atmosphere. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? And I feel like the pictures give the atmosphere better than his description, if that makes any
Okay.
sense. I know a picture's worth a thousand words, right? So I
So
don't know.
I'm looking at some of these pictures, and you've got really old, dilapidated apartment buildings, and there's
Hmm.
green trees growing out of the cracks
Yeah,
of the asphalt.
exactly. Like
Like
basically
nature is
nature's taken
reclaiming.
over. Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah,
And so
kind of interesting.
anybody, yeah, definitely check it out. But the point is, I guess I don't know if I wanted more. It just wasn't quite what I wanted. And that's not to say it's bad. I just think it was more atmosphere than meat. You know what I mean? Like it was more
Then
like
history, you'd
like a
like a better blend.
feeling. Yeah, I guess I just or more anecdotes. Like instead of is more general than
Hmm.
like, oh, we walked through here and then a guard spotted us, and he does talk a little bit about that, but it's more like you run quickly to get away from the guard and end up diving into the water and hiding under a bridge. And instead of just like telling it as a story, he's like telling you like as a feeling, if that makes any sense. Anyway, uh, one thing that was kind of interesting is he talks about how a lot of celebrities will have gone there, but they don't publish it. So you know how celebrities nowadays they just put everything on Instagram. But he
Yeah.
basically says they know better than to like put it on Instagram. But he basically insinuates that he's brought like famous people to the area and just kind of kept it secret. And I mean, he kind of basically describes this as being like an obsession of his. Like once you go there, you just always want to keep going back. And he describes, how crazy, how cold it is in the winter, and how you just go try to find a fire. And it's just it's interesting, but I just wish there was a little more meat on the bone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it seems like looking at some of these pictures, these buildings look like a paintball
Right,
game or a
right.
video game that
They
you
do,
would
and there's a
like
ton of
go.
there are a ton of video games that take place. Like called, I think one of the Call of Duties is in Pripyat and has a
Okay.
famous area where you are by that Ferris wheel and stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
It's
I mean, in fact, there's actually games called Stalker. So there these people that take people around are called stalkers. That's what he calls himself, a
okay. So
stalker.
this took place in 1986. We're
Hmm.
almost to 2026. So we're
Yeah,
talking like
40
40 years
years.
ago. Does he
Yeah.
talk about it all, like why they haven't reclaimed the land, like
No,
just
I mean
dozed
it's
these
well they can't
buildings?
because of the radiation. The radiation is
It's
going to be there
still
for
an
too long.
issue.
Yeah, yeah. But he basically doesn't care about it. He doesn't worry about it at all. And that's what he talks
And
about. He's
he's
like,
given tours. He's
like
like,
I don't care. Yeah. He's like, it's just not a big deal to him. Right? Like if you and I were to go there, we'd have a Geiger counter, we'd be paranoid. He's just like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Oh, who cares? You know what I mean?
okay. Yeah.
So
Takes a special kind of a person to live that life.
so it's definitely. And I mean it's kind of anyway, it I think if you are interested in this, I know I feel like I say this a lot. If you're interested in this topic, then it's probably like a triple, maybe a
Yeah.
double. I don't know. But if you're
Yeah.
not, then it's basically a single or foul ball. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're not gonna like it. But I highly recommend the HBO series called Chernobyl. It's weird because it's in English and I think they have British accents. You know, they're supposed to be Russian or Ukrainian, but it was a stylistic choice that they made just so that it'd be easier to, you don't have to have subtitles or whatever. But it's really, really well done if you want to know how the disaster actually happened. And the cleanup is like the cleanup of it is so intriguing how they did it. It's just crazy. So anyway, strong recommendation for that. The book, it's kind of like a if you're like me, it's kind of a nice ancillary read.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, there you
Well,
go.
I know when you go on vacation, you tend to go to the places that people don't go visit.
Yeah,
So if
for
you
sure.
went to Salt Lake, a lot of people would maybe go see the LDS temple. Maybe they would go, I don't know, to like the Brigham House. There's like different places
Sure.
that you would go. Matt would not go to those places.
No, I would go to
You'd
like
go find some
weird
underground burrito
ghost
place.
town, underground
Yeah.
burrito. That sounds delicious. Let's go to underground burrito. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, so this definitely seems like a place that you would be
yeah,
disappointed if they didn't have
it's
a room
it
that you could rent in this building.
yeah,
They should rent
exactly.
rooms out.
Yeah, it's basically totally illegal to go in there. And but it's funny
Oh,
because he basically acts like the guards, some of the guards are like, who cares? I don't care if you go in. You know what I mean?
okay.
It's interesting. Um, it just seems like they don't care, but they're there to, be there. So,
Interesting.
one of the things that I guess I'll just say one more quick thing that I remembered. Apparently, there was at some time kind of an automobile graveyard and like tanks and just all this old stuff, all these old cars and stuff that just were all in this one giant spot. And apparently, a lot of the celebrities had heard about this, and there's probably a famous picture that I don't know the name of it. Um, but anyway, a lot of people want to go to that, and he always tells them, "Don't. It's not worth your time. All the scavengers have already come and taken all this scrap metal and sold it, and it's basically just a field." And they're like, "No, no, no! It's got to be. This picture's so cool. We got to go check it out." And he's like, "I trust me. You don't have to go." Then they'll walk like miles and miles, and they're like, and he was right, obviously, and they're disappointed. And he's like, guys, I told
Told
you
you.
this is not cool." Um, anyway, it was that's enough. Enough said. I want to hear
Okay.
about Shoe Dog. You mentioned that this might be a book that I would have read, and I haven't read it.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
pitch me. Tell me why I should read this book.
this is a Matt Liggett book. You would love
Okay.
it. This
Okay.
is such a cool story about one of the greatest companies of our time.
Yeah,
Arguably, I think Nike has been just a household name,
for
a
sure.
global name.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who Nike is.
Yep.
But when you read this book, there are so many instances where Nike would have failed if Phil Knight was not the owner, CEO, pushing everything through.
Hmm.
So it goes it's kind of the book is it's about Nike, but it's also about Phil Knight. So it
Hmm.
starts out with his life beginning. He grew up in the Northwest. He ran track in high school, in college, pretty fair athlete. When he graduates, so he goes to school in accounting. That's why the story's so funny. He graduates and he just travels the world. He goes all over. He goes to Greece and he's like writing letters to his dad. He doesn't have any money. He's kind of broke, but he just wants to travel. He's like gathering all these different philosophies. He comes back. I think Nike is based out of Oregon, if
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
remembering that correctly. He comes back to Oregon and he has this business idea, and I believe this was his thesis was the Japanese make very good shoes, and it would be a great opportunity to have a distributorship in the United States. And his professor's like, that's a stupid idea. But he does it. So he goes, and I'm not going to go play by play through the book because you really have to read it
Sure.
to get a good grasp. But he goes to Japan. He strikes a deal. The name of the shoe company, I've got to find it here real quick. Let's see here. So he starts his company called Blue Ribbon Sports, and he's importing, they're called Onitsuka Tiger shoes. And he's like competing, selling these shoes to runners, trying to compete with all of like Adidas and all of these other companies at the time that were
Mhm.
really big. Um, but he gets really good at being a distributor, and time again, like the business is about to fail. The Japanese are like, who is this guy? And but he has this crazy idea, and so he wants to take his company. He calls it Blue Ribbon Sports.
Can you pause for
Uh,
1 second? Can you
yeah,
imagine
go
we
ahead.
it just stayed Blue Ribbon Sports and you're like, dude, check out my new blue ribbons, man. Aren't they so
Yeah, I
cool?
know.
My blue ribbon ones. Like,
Well, the funny thing is the name of Nike. So he didn't come up with the name himself. It was a name suggested by Jeff Johnson. And I don't know, maybe a lot of people already know this. He was one of the first employees at Blue Ribbon Sports, the company that later became Nike. So the story behind the name of Nike is in 1971, as Knight was transitioning from distributing Onitsuka Tiger shoes to creating his own brand, he needed a new name for his company. Several options were considered, but none felt right. While Knight was leaning toward the name Dimension 6, okay, Johnson had a dream in which the Greek goddess of victory, Nike, appeared to him. Inspired by this vision, Johnson suggested the name Nike. Though Knight wasn't initially thrilled with the name, he eventually agreed to it, especially because they were running out of time to finalize the branding. The name stuck, and the rest is history. Today, Nike, or in England, they say Nike, they don't
yep.
add the E at the end, is synonymous with athletic performance, innovation, and victory, just like the goddess it was named after. So that's where Nike came from, was this employee. And going through this story, several times Phil Knight, like the company is going to run out of money. He's running from bank to bank, like taking out a loan over here and then paying off this other loan that he's got over there. And there was one occasion where everything was going to crumble if he didn't get like this one line of credit. But time and time again, he's just like this force behind this company to make it successful. And he's got all kinds of deals that are falling through with the Japanese. I mean, it was like a cutthroat culture over there.
Hmm.
They didn't want him to succeed, and he's trying to build his own brand, and he's competing with these huge. I mean, it
Yeah.
would be like me starting a company today, trying to compete with Nike and Adidas. Just
Yeah.
like, who is this Blue Ribbon Sports? But it goes through the story of him just building this company. And so when I see somebody who's a billionaire, and people are, like Elon Musk or Phil Knight or whoever, Mark Cuban, you name whatever billionaire, there is a story of desperation and struggle, almost without fail, with most of them. Now, there are a lot of billionaires that inherited their wealth, but you look at Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, there is a scrappiness in these people. So when you read this story, this is about as scrappy as it gets. So the book goes through the story of building this brand from nothing to this huge empire. It talks about all of the setbacks. I feel like he did a good job of just kind of sharing these really embarrassing stories, decisions that he made, and the growing pains that they went through. He gives a lot of credit to the team that he built. So people like Bill Bowerman, his track coach and co-founder Jeff Johnson, and other early employees who shared his vision. So he talks about loyalty and just surrounding yourself with a passionate team. There were a lot of employees early on that were a driving force to make the company successful. It's a great story. Um, and then constant innovating. So they Bowerman, who was his coach, his track coach, he came up with this idea of the creation of the waffle sole, to the introduction of the iconic swoosh logo, which I think they paid,
Paid
I want to say
35
150.
bucks.
What was it?
35 $35
It was 35
to,
bucks.
yeah, to Carolyn Davidson. I was going to
Okay.
ask you if they talk about that story.
They
Um,
do. Oh yeah,
okay.
he goes through again, the book goes, it's about 380 pages from the beginning to kind of present day to the company that they are now. A couple years ago, I was on a flight and I sat next to this guy who worked for Nike. And I was like, "Well, what do you do?" And he's a young kid. He's like, "Well, I go out and we get sponsorships for like long distance runners." I was like, "Oh, interesting. Tell me about that." And I was just asking him all of these questions, learning about all of these rules. Like within a shoe, you can't have a certain depth. You can't go more than a certain depth on the cushion of a long distance runner's shoe. So they have all of these little technologies built in
Mhm.
to the shoe so that the shoes, it's kind of like drag racing. The
Mhm.
cars can't be that different. They have to be pretty much the same.
Gotcha.
And so all of the innovation that Nike now puts into these shoes, but that all started way back with him selling these shoes that were made in Japan. So you just think about Nike is on the bleeding edge of technology today. It also talks about the sponsorships. So Michael Jordan, there was a book that, or a movie rather, that came
Mhm.
out with Matt Damon not too long ago, which I thought was pretty good.
That
How,
was okay, but it's just I kind of wish they wouldn't have done like such a, no, a noticeable or known character or
yeah,
known actor
yeah.
because it kind of takes you out of the I don't know. Anyway,
I think the movie was okay. The book was way better because the book is,
is the book as did they is it really like as I don't know what extreme as like oh we're just making this huge we're putting all the money on this Michael Jordan character who's the third pick. Is it
yes,
really okay? So
yeah.
that the movie's not exaggerating.
No, it's like make or break.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
Again, I think the thing about Phil Knight, and again, he's a CPA, he's an accountant.
Right.
And what's interesting is accountants are some of the most, I mean, we work with accountants in my field all the time.
Yeah.
They're some of the most risk averse
Oh, for
people
sure.
because they are good at running numbers. They're
Sure.
good. They're
They call them bean counters for a reason, right? Like
yeah,
there's
they
not, yeah.
don't generally don't like risk or business risk. They
Hmm.
like a nice balance sheet. They like good cash flows. They want all the
Yep.
numbers to look black at the end, to not see red, but see
Hmm.
profitability and all of that. So it's just interesting. You've got this CPA, but he's like 10 times the entrepreneur than he is a CPA. He even taught accounting classes. He was teaching at a college, local college. So it's just such a great story. I wanted to share a couple quotes from the book. He said, "As ever, the accountant in me saw the risk, the entrepreneur saw the possibility, so I split the difference and kept moving forward." And that's just kind of his mindset. And he talks about how him and his dad, he'd call his dad every night, and they'd both be in their recliners. And he was poor for a long time. It's not like he was
Sure.
making millions of dollars early on. I mean, he
Yeah.
does talk about the wealth eventually flowing in, but for much of his the early on, he's like sleeping in the warehouse and coming home at night and they're dirt poor, they can't make rent, but he's just driven to keep the company going. And a lot is to be said to his wife that like stuck with him through all of that chaos. But at night, he said, leaning back in my recliner, staring at the ceiling, I tried to settle myself. I told myself, life is growth. You grow or you die. And that that was just, I thought, a pretty good mindset. So there is a manifesto. Have you read the Phil
Yeah, the
Knight's
Nike.
Nike
Yeah,
manifesto?
yeah.
So some people have. I'm going to just share some of these. There's only like ten laws.
Hmm.
And so I'll just read them here for those that want the cliff notes to Phil Knight's manifesto. So, number one is our business is change. If you're running a business, you really have to think about the value add that you're adding into the marketplace, not being like somebody else,
Hmm.
but representing change. Number two, we're on offense all the time. And I thought that's good. If you just sit back and play defense, eventually you're just going to get pounded. I mean, you do need to have defense, but he said we're on offense, looking for ways to innovate, ways to grow, ways to leverage our talents, people. He said perfect results count, not a perfect process. Break the rules, fight the law. So push those boundaries wherever you can. Number four, this is as much about a battle as about business. So he kind of brings warfare into the concepts of war into business. Number five, assume nothing. Make sure people keep their promises. Push yourselves, push others, stretch the possible. Number six, live off the land. This principle is probably the one thing that I got out of the book that I apply to business today, and that is scarcity breeds creativity. There are a lot of times in business where things feel scarce. You might feel like, well, I don't have
Hmm.
the budget. I don't have the people. I don't
Hmm.
have the resources. And you can dwell on those things and blame the bad outcomes on those things. But if you look at it and say, you know what? All of these things are true. I don't have the budget. I don't have the people. Like I don't have the resources. What do I have and how can I be creative with what I've got? And that to me is being resourceful, being resilient. He calls that living off the land. Just work with what you got. You know, if you were dropped into a forest, you'd have to figure it out. Number, what was that, seven? Your job isn't done until the job is done. And that's something we talk about in our, in my practice, if your job's done, great, go home. Like enjoy the rest of the day off. But if your job's not done, you're working until midnight until it is until it is finished. So it's a motivation to finish the job. Number eight, dangers, bureaucracy, personal ambition, energy takers versus energy givers. You probably are familiar with that. People that suck the life out of the business. Knowing our weaknesses and don't get too many things on the platter. So have kind of like a focused agenda of what you're working on. Number nine, it won't be pretty. That's true. There's like good days and bad days. So just be okay that it's not going to be a beautiful process. And then the last one, number 10, if we do the right things, he says, we'll make money damn near automatic. So that's a quote from, from Phil Knight. So focus on the right things, be innovative, live off the land, be on offense. It's just a really gritty book about building a Fortune 500 company. So that Shoe Dog, I think, Matt, you would love it.
Okay. Well, I just put it on Libby, so it's a few
Whoa,
weeks
hey.
away. We'll see what
All
happens.
right. Okay. So great book by Phil Knight. And anytime I can find a book like that about how a company is built, it's just really inspiring
Mhm.
and motivational to, work on whatever you're working on.
So is this a home run? Is this what is this?
This is yeah, I would say this is a home run book,
Hmm.
home run business book. And I don't give those out. I don't know how many home runs I've given out since we started the podcast.
Probably a couple, yeah, probably a
There's
few.
maybe been a handful. It's entertaining. It is a true story. and I think it's pretty well written. I can't remember if he had a co-author. I've got, let's see. Yeah, it's a memoir by the creator of Nike. Warren Buffett said, the best book I read last year. Phil is a gifted storyteller, so it just looks like that. Shoe
Cool.
Dog. Classic. Probably reread it at some point, but there are a lot of good principles. I hope I did it justice with a quick summary today.
It's hard. That's the challenge of our job here on the podcast is how in 20 minutes, how do you sum up a 500-page book? Right.
Yeah. Well, I would say if you're starting a business, read Shoe Dog. Start there and feel okay with, okay, I'm feel like I'm losing battles every day. You just keep moving forward. Keep
Yeah.
pushing.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for listening to the Pitchbook podcast. Like, subscribe, tell your friends. If you want to be a guest, let us know. And thank you, of course, to Deja Vega for the great music. Check them out. And once again, thanks for listening to the Pitchbook podcast.